Lily and Grace, 11-year-old twins living in extreme poverty, find an injured man after a car accident on a deserted road. Against all advice, they decide to save him using their last coins to call for emergency help and stay by his side. The man is Daniel Crawford, billionaire CEO of a business empire who awakens with no memory of the accident. Touched by the young girl's kindness, Daniel decides to help them financially, but a routine investigation reveals the impossible. DNA tests prove that Lily and Grace are his biological daughters, the same babies he believed had died at birth 11 years ago. The discovery shakes the foundations of his life when he discovers that his deceased wife lied about the twins' death. Now, Daniel must rebuild not only his memory, but his entire concept of the family he thought he had lost forever. Fate had conspired to reunite father and daughters through the most unlikely of encounters. If you believe that fate brings people together in the most unexpected ways, hit that like button and let me know in the comments where you're listening to this incredible story from, whether you're at home, driving, or taking a walk. Today, I'm sharing a story that will remind you that sometimes the people who save us are the ones who need saving most, and miracles can happen when we least expect them. The rain hammered against the cracked windows of the old trailer as 11-year-old Lily pressed her face against the cold glass, watching the storm rage outside. Her twin sister Grace sat cross-legged on their shared mattress, carefully counting the few crumpled dollar bills they had managed to collect from returning bottles and cans that week. The girls had been living alone in the abandoned trailer park on the outskirts of Cedar Falls for 3 months now, ever since their foster mother had disappeared without warning, leaving them with nothing but each other. "We have $7.35, Grace announced quietly, her voice barely audible over the thunder. Despite being born only 4 minutes after Lily, Grace had always been the more practical one, the one who kept track of their meager finances and made sure they stretched every penny as far as possible. Her dark hair hung in tangles around her thin face, and her clothes, hand-me-downs that had seen better days, hung loose on her small frame. Lily turned from the window, her identical dark eyes filled with the same quiet determination that had kept them alive these past months. "Mrs. Patterson said she'd give us $5 more if we help her clean out her garage tomorrow," she said, trying to sound hopeful. Mrs. Patterson was the elderly woman who lived in the only occupied trailer 3 lots down. She was kind to them, but Lily could see the worry in her eyes whenever she looked at the twins. Everyone knew 2 11-year-old girls shouldn't be living alone, but nobody seemed to know what to do about it. The storm outside seemed to be getting worse, and the old trailer shook with each gust of wind. Grace moved to sit beside her sister, and they huddled together under the thin blanket they shared, listening to the rain drum against the roof. They had learned not to complain, not to cry, not to wish for things they couldn't have. Survival had taught them to be grateful for small mercies. A warm meal from Mrs. Patterson, a few dollars from odd jobs. A night when the trailer didn't leak too badly. "Do you remember what Mom used to say about storms?" Grace asked softly, referring to their birth mother, whose face had grown hazy in their memories over the years in foster care. They had been taken from her when they were just 6, and she had died in a car accident 2 years later. The social worker had told them that their father was unknown, that their mother had never revealed his identity. Lily nodded, a small smile crossing her lips. "She said storms wash the world clean, make room for new beginnings." It was one of the few clear memories they had of their mother, her gentle voice telling them not to be afraid of the thunder, that something beautiful always came after the rain. They clung to these small fragments of their past, these tiny pieces of love that had somehow survived all the years of moving from one foster home to another. As if summoned by their conversation, a tremendous crack of thunder shook the trailer, followed immediately by a sound that made both girls freeze. The screech of tires on wet pavement, the sickening crunch of metal, and then an eerie silence that seemed louder than the storm itself. They looked at each other with wide eyes, their hearts pounding in unison the way they often did, as if they shared not just a face, but a soul. "That came from the road," Lily whispered, already reaching for the flashlight they kept beside their bed. Grace was right behind her as they crept to the door, their bare feet silent on the cold floor. The main road ran just past their trailer park, and in weather like this, it was treacherous. They had heard accidents before, but something about this one felt different, more urgent. Lily slowly opened the door, and the wind immediately whipped their hair around their faces. Through the sheets of rain, they could see headlights pointing at odd angles in the ditch beside the road. One car was overturned, its lights flickering weakly. Another car, a sleek black sedan, had crashed into a tree, steam rising from its crumpled hood. The storm seemed to pause for just a moment, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting to see what the twins would do next. Without hesitation, both girls ran into the storm, their thin nightgowns immediately soaked through by the driving rain. Their bare feet splashed through puddles and stumbled over the uneven ground as they made their way toward the wreckage. The overturned car appeared empty, its driver's door hanging open, but the black sedan drew their attention. Through the spider-webbed windshield, they could see a figure slumped over the steering wheel. "Sir! Sir, can you hear us?" Lily called out as they reached the car. But there was no response. Grace tried the passenger door while Lily worked on the driver's side. The door was dented but not completely stuck, and with both girls pulling together, it finally gave way with a groan of twisted metal. The man inside was unconscious, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. He was wearing an expensive-looking suit, now torn and stained, and his dark hair was streaked with grey at the temples. Grace immediately pressed her small fingers to the man's wrist, something she had learned from a first aid class their last foster mother had insisted they take. "His pulse is weak but steady," she reported, her voice surprisingly calm for an 11-year-old. "We need to get help." The man appeared to be in his early 30s, tall and well-built, with strong features that spoke of confidence and authority, even in unconsciousness. Lily looked around desperately. Their trailer didn't have a phone, and the nearest neighbor with a working landline was Mrs. Patterson, but her trailer was dark. She always went to bed early. The storm was still raging, and they could see more cars approaching on the dangerous stretch of road. "We have to move him," Lily decided, "if another car hits this one." It seemed impossible, two small girls moving a grown man, but desperation gave them strength they didn't know they possessed. Grace climbed into the back seat and pulled while Lily pushed, and somehow they managed to drag the unconscious man from the wreckage. He was heavier than anything they had ever tried to lift, but they refused to give up. Step by step, they pulled him away from the car and toward their trailer. The journey felt like it took hours, though it was probably only minutes. Both girls were crying now. Though whether from effort, fear, or the cold rain, they couldn't tell. Their small hands were scraped and bleeding from the broken glass and rough pavement, but they didn't stop. They had learned in their short lives that sometimes you're all someone has, and that was enough reason to keep going. When they finally got the man into their trailer, they were all shivering violently. Grace immediately grabbed their only towel and began cleaning the blood from his head wound, while Lily covered him with their shared blanket. The cut didn't look too deep, but he was still unconscious, and his breathing seemed labored. "Lily," Grace said quietly, her voice tight with worry, "he needs a hospital." "Real doctors." Lily looked at their small collection of money on the table, $7.35. It wouldn't be enough for an ambulance, not even close. But Mrs. Patterson had a car, an old pickup truck she rarely drove. "I'm going to wake up Mrs. Patterson," she decided. "You stay with him, keep him warm." As Lily prepared to go back into the storm, the man stirred slightly, his eyelids fluttering. Both girls immediately leaned closer, hope blooming in their chests. His lips moved as if he was trying to speak, but no words came. Grace gently took his hand in both of hers. "You're safe," she whispered. "We're going to take care of you." Something about the way she said it, with such fierce protectiveness from such a small person, would stay with him long after he recovered his memories. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson had been awake for the past hour, pacing her small living room and worrying about the two girls who lived alone 3 trailers down. The storm had been particularly fierce, and she knew their old trailer leaked badly. She had been debating whether to check on them when she heard the frantic knocking on her door. Opening it to find Lily soaked to the bone and speaking rapidly about an accident and an injured man, Eleanor didn't hesitate for even a second. "Get my keys from the kitchen counter," she commanded, already reaching for her coat, "and grab that old quilt from the couch." Eleanor Patterson was 73 years old, but she'd been a nurse for 40 years before retiring, and crisis brought out the steady competence that had saved countless lives. She'd been watching over Lily and Grace unofficially since they'd been abandoned, making sure they had food and occasionally slipping them a few dollars for odd jobs. Within minutes, they had loaded the unconscious man into the back of Eleanor's pickup truck, with Grace cradling his head in her lap and Lily holding his hand. Eleanor drove through the storm with the skill of someone who had made countless emergency runs over the years, her weathered hands steady on the wheel as she navigated the flooded roads to Cedar Falls General Hospital. "What's your name, honey?" Eleanor asked the man gently as they pulled into the hospital parking lot. He had regained consciousness during the drive, but seemed confused and disoriented. His eyes, a striking blue-gray, kept focusing on the two girls who had saved him, as if he was trying to remember something important. I'm not sure," he said slowly, wincing as he tried to sit up. "Daniel, I think. Daniel Crawford." The name felt right on his tongue, but everything else was fuzzy. He remembered the feel of rain, the sound of young voices calling to him through darkness, small hands pulling him to safety. "These girls, they saved me." His voice was filled with wonder and gratitude as he looked at Lily and Grace, who were holding hands and watching him with concerned, dark eyes. The emergency room staff took over quickly, whisking Daniel away on a gurney while a nurse questioned Eleanor about the circumstances of the accident. Lily and Grace sat close together in the uncomfortable plastic chairs, their wet clothes making them shiver despite the hospital's warmth. They watched through the glass doors as doctors examined Daniel, hooking him up to machines and cleaning his wounds. "Do you think he'll be okay?" Grace asked quietly, her voice small in the busy emergency room. Despite having known him for less than 3 hours, both girls felt strangely connected to the man they had pulled from the wreckage. There had been something about him, even unconscious, that made them want to protect him. Eleanor sat down beside them and wrapped her arms around both girls. "He's going to be just fine thanks to you two," she said firmly. "What you did tonight was incredibly brave and incredibly dangerous," she added with a stern look, "but brave." She had seen many things in her nursing career, but the sight of 2 11-year-old girls risking their lives to save a stranger had moved her more than she could express. A young doctor approached them, his expression kind but professional. "Are you family?" he asked, looking from Eleanor to the girls. When Eleanor explained the situation, the doctor's eyebrows rose in surprise. "He's asking for the girls who saved him," the doctor said. "He wants to thank them personally. He's got a concussion and some cuts and bruises, but he's going to make a full recovery." As they walked toward Daniel's room, none of them could have imagined that this was just the beginning of a story that would change all their lives forever. The man lying in the hospital bed, struggling to remember his own identity, was about to discover that the two little girls who had saved his life were connected to him in ways that defied every law of probability and chance. 3 days later, Daniel Crawford was released from the hospital with a clean bill of health, though his memories of the accident remained frustratingly hazy. What he did remember clearly was the kindness of two small girls who had risked everything to save a stranger. During his stay, he had learned from Mrs. Patterson about their living situation, and it had troubled him deeply. No child should live the way Lily and Grace were living, especially not children with such generous hearts. Daniel's first clear memory upon waking had been of his identity returning in pieces. CEO of Crawford Industries, a multinational corporation he had built from nothing after aging out of foster care himself at 18. He remembered his penthouse apartment in Chicago, his fleet of cars, his busy schedule of meetings and board presentations. But somehow, sitting in that hospital bed, none of it seemed as important as the memory of two small hands pulling him from darkness. "I want to help them," he told Mrs. Patterson when she came to check on him before his discharge. They were sitting in the hospital cafeteria, sharing coffee while he signed the last of his release papers. "Those girls saved my life, Eleanor. The least I can do is make sure they have a proper home, food, everything they need." Eleanor studied him carefully over her coffee cup. She had lived long enough to be skeptical of wealthy men making grand promises, but there was something in Daniel's eyes that spoke of genuine care. "They're special girls," she said finally. "Been taking care of each other since they were abandoned. They don't trust easy, and they don't take charity well. If you really want to help, you'll need to be patient." When they returned to the trailer park, Daniel was shocked by the conditions. The girls' trailer was barely habitable, holes in the roof, broken windows patched with cardboard, a space heater that looked dangerously old. But when Lily and Grace opened the door, their faces lit up with genuine joy at seeing him healthy and walking. "Mr. Daniel!" Grace exclaimed, throwing her thin arms around his waist in a spontaneous hug. "You look so much better!" Lily was right behind her sister, and Daniel found himself overwhelmed by their warmth. In his world of corporate boardrooms and calculated relationships, such uncomplicated affection was rare and precious. "I wanted to thank you properly," Daniel said, kneeling down so he was at their eye level. "What you did for me. There aren't words for that kind of courage." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I know this might seem like a lot, but I want you girls to have this. Consider it a reward for being heroes." Inside the envelope was $5,000 in cash. Both girls stared at the money with wide eyes, then looked at each other in that silent communication they had perfected over 11 years of sharing everything. "Mr. Daniel," Lily said slowly, "we can't take this. We didn't help you for money." Daniel felt his heart clench at her words. Here were two children who had nothing, refusing money because they hadn't acted out of greed, but out of pure kindness. "I know you didn't," he said gently, "but I want to give it to you anyway. You saved my life. That's worth more than money can measure." Grace looked at the envelope, then at their leaking roof, then at her sister. "We could fix the trailer," she whispered. "Get real food, maybe even new clothes." The practical part of her mind was calculating all the things they could do with such an unimaginable sum, but her heart was still hesitant to accept charity. "Or," Daniel said carefully, an idea forming in his mind, "you could come stay with me for a while. I have a big house in Chicago with plenty of room. You could go to a real school, have your own bedrooms, eat regular meals." The offer surprised even him. He had never considered having children in his life. But something about Lily and Grace made him want to give them everything they had been denied. The twins looked at each other again. That silent conversation passing between them. They had learned to be suspicious of adults making promises, but Daniel felt different. He had needed them, and they had been there. Now they needed him, and he was offering to be there for them. But as they considered this life-changing possibility, none of them knew that Daniel's decision to help was about to uncover a secret that would shake the very foundations of his world. 2 weeks later, Lily and Grace found themselves in a world they had only seen in movies. Daniel's penthouse apartment in downtown Chicago was a palace compared to their trailer. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, bedrooms larger than their entire former home, and a kitchen stocked with more food than they had seen in their entire lives. Daniel had enrolled them in the prestigious Lakeshore Academy, bought them wardrobes fit for princesses, and hired Mrs. Chen, a kind housekeeper who spoke to them in gentle Mandarin while teaching them to cook. The adjustment wasn't easy. Both girls would wake up in the middle of the night, disoriented by the soft mattresses and clean sheets, sometimes wandering into each other's rooms just to make sure this wasn't all a dream. The first week, they barely touched the elaborate meals Mrs. Chen prepared, their stomachs accustomed to sparse portions and poor nutrition. Daniel watched them with growing concern until Mrs. Chen suggested starting with simple foods: toast, soup, basic fruits that wouldn't overwhelm their systems. "It's like we're princesses in a fairy tale," Lily whispered to Grace one morning as they stood in their walk-in closets, still amazed by the rows of beautiful clothes Daniel had bought them. "But what if the spell breaks? What if we wake up and we're back in the trailer?" The fear of losing this new life haunted both girls, making them careful not to ask for anything, not to seem ungrateful, not to give Daniel any reason to change his mind. Daniel, despite his busy schedule running Crawford Industries, made dramatic changes to his routine. He moved his first meetings to after 9 a.m. so he could have breakfast with the girls every morning, and he installed a dedicated phone line so they could call him any time during the day. His assistant, Rebecca, was initially shocked by his new priorities, but she quickly adapted, even keeping a supply of art materials in the office for when Lily visited. The girls threw themselves into their new school with determination that impressed their teachers. Grace tested into advanced mathematics and science courses typically reserved for high school students, while Lily discovered a passion for painting that had her staying after school for art club every day. Both girls were hungry for knowledge in a way that spoke of years of educational neglect, reading voraciously and asking endless questions about everything from history to astronomy. "Mr. Daniel," Grace said one evening as they sat in his study, she and Lily working on homework while he reviewed quarterly reports, "why don't you have a family? I mean, besides us now?" The question was asked with the innocent directness that only children possess, but it hit Daniel harder than any hostile takeover bid. He had been dreading this conversation, knowing it would eventually come. Daniel set down his papers and considered his answer carefully. "I was in foster care too when I was young," he said finally. "After I aged out at 18, I was so focused on building my company, on proving I could be successful despite my background, that I never took time for relationships. I thought success would be enough to fill the emptiness." He looked at both girls, their dark heads bent over their math homework, and felt something shift in his chest. "I was wrong. I thought I was complete, but I was just existing." The revelation that Daniel had also been a foster child created an immediate deeper bond between them. Lily looked up from her worksheet, her expression thoughtful. "Our caseworker said our dad never wanted us. That's why we ended up in foster care after Mom died." There was no self-pity in her voice, just the matter-of-fact acceptance of children who had learned early that adults weren't always reliable. "But maybe he just didn't know about us. Like you didn't know you needed a family." The innocence of her statement made Daniel's heart ache. These girls had been through so much. The loss of their mother, multiple foster placements, abandonment, months of living alone, yet they still believed in the possibility of good in people. "Maybe you're right," he said softly. his voice thick with emotion. Sometimes, the best things in life come when we're not looking for them. As he said it, he realized how true it was. He had found his family in the most unexpected way possible. That night, Daniel lay awake thinking about the girl's words and the profound changes they had brought to his life. He had never really considered having children, had always assumed his legacy would be his company, his wealth, his success in the business world. But watching Lily and Grace transform over the past 2 weeks, seeing Grace's confidence bloom as she excelled in advanced mathematics, watching Lily's artistic talents emerge in art class, witnessing their trust in him grow day by day, he realized they had given his life a meaning that no business success ever could. For the first time in his adult life, he looked forward to coming home more than going to work. The transformation wasn't just in the girls. Daniel found himself laughing more, worrying less about minor business setbacks, and discovering joy in simple moments, helping with homework, watching movies together, listening to their stories about school. His staff noticed the change immediately. He was calmer in meetings, more patient with difficult clients, and he smiled more often. Rebecca, his longtime assistant, told him privately that she had never seen him so genuinely happy. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Crawford Industries. Margaret Foster, a social worker from the Department of Children and Family Services, sat across from Daniel's desk with a thick file in front of her. "I'm here about Lily and Grace Chen," she said, using the last name the girls had been given in foster care. "While we appreciate your generosity in helping them, we need to discuss making their placement with you official. There are legal procedures we must follow." Daniel's protective instincts flared immediately. "What do you mean official? They're safe, they're happy, they're thriving. They're eating regular meals, attending an excellent school, and they have stability for the first time in their lives. What more do you need?" He had grown to love these girls as if they were his own daughters, and the thought of losing them terrified him in a way that no business crisis ever had. "We need to run comprehensive background checks, complete home studies, establish legal guardianship," Margaret explained patiently, opening her folder to reveal a daunting stack of paperwork. "And we need to update their medical records and genetic information. The girls were abandoned as infants, and we have very little information about their biological parents or family medical history. This is particularly important now that they're in a stable environment where proper health care is accessible." She opened the file, and Daniel glimpsed photos of the twins as babies, looking impossibly small and fragile in hospital cribs. There were also copies of their birth certificates, foster care records, and medical files that painted a picture of 2 children who had been failed by the system multiple times. Their mother, Victoria Chen, died when they were 8. She never revealed the identity of their father, and there are no known relatives. As Margaret continued explaining the legal requirements, Daniel found himself staring at those baby photos. Something about them nagged at him, a feeling of familiarity he couldn't place. The name Victoria Chen seemed to echo in his mind, though he couldn't quite grasp why. But as she mentioned the need for updated medical records and genetic testing, he had no way of knowing that this routine bureaucratic requirement was about to reveal a truth that would change everything he thought he knew about his past and about the 2 little girls who had somehow found their way into his heart. The genetic testing was supposed to be routine, just a simple cheek swab to update the girls' medical records for their new school and to establish any hereditary health concerns. Daniel had volunteered to be tested as well, explaining to Margaret Foster that as their guardian, he wanted to have complete medical information in case of emergencies. It seemed like a responsible, practical decision that would help him care for them better. Dr. Sarah Martinez at Chicago General Hospital had been handling family genetic counseling for 15 years, and she had seen many surprising results. Children discovering they had different fathers than they thought, siblings learning they were only half related, adopted children finding biological relatives. But when she opened the file containing the DNA analysis for Daniel Crawford and his 2 wards, she had to read the results 3 times before she trusted her own eyes. The genetic markers were unmistakable. The probability of paternity was 99.97%. Lily and Grace weren't just living with Daniel Crawford. They were his biological daughters. "This can't be right," Daniel said when Dr. Martinez called him to her office the following morning. He sat across from her desk. The test results spread out before him like evidence of an impossible crime. "I've never had children. I would remember having children. This has to be some kind of laboratory error." But even as he spoke, fragments of memories began surfacing. Memories he had buried so deeply he had almost convinced himself they were dreams. Victoria. Her name came back to him like a physical blow, hitting him with such force that he had to grip the arms of his chair to steady himself. Victoria Chen, the young woman he had dated briefly 12 years ago. Just as Crawford Industries was taking off and consuming every moment of his life, she had been beautiful, intelligent, working her way through graduate school while caring for her sick mother. Their relationship had been intense but short-lived. Daniel's obsession with building his company, his 18-hour workdays, and his single-minded focus on success had driven them apart after just a few passionate months. "She told me she was pregnant," Daniel whispered, the memory crystallizing with painful clarity. He was 23 then, terrified of failure, working desperate hours to keep his fledgling company alive. The responsibility of a baby had seemed impossible when he was barely keeping his business afloat. "I offered to help, to support the baby, to do whatever she needed. But she said she didn't want to tie me down to something I wasn't ready for. She said she would handle everything alone." Dr. Martinez leaned forward compassionately, her years of experience helping her navigate these delicate revelations. "What happened after that, Daniel? Did you maintain contact with Victoria?" She could see the pain building in his eyes as the memories came flooding back. "She moved away about 2 months later," Daniel continued, his voice growing thick with emotion. "She said she wanted to be closer to her family in California. We talked occasionally, but I was so consumed with the company. Then she called me from the hospital." The memory hit him like a tsunami. "She was crying, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. She said there had been complications during delivery, that our son didn't make it. She said the baby had died." Dr. Martinez studied the files in front of her carefully. "According to these results and the birth certificates, Victoria Chen gave birth to daughters, not a son, twins. And obviously, they survived." The implications hung heavy in the room between them. "Mr. Crawford, is it possible that Victoria lied about the baby's death? Perhaps she felt it would be easier for both of you if you believed the child hadn't survived?" Daniel's world tilted on its axis, everything he thought he knew about his past rearranging itself into a new, devastating pattern. The woman he had once loved had given birth to his children, daughters, not the son she had told him about, and then let him believe they were dead while they grew up in poverty and abandonment. "But why?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why would she lie about something so monumental?" "Agreed. People make desperate decisions when they're scared and alone," Dr. Martinez said gently. "Perhaps she thought you would be better off without the burden of children when your career was just starting. Perhaps she thought she could handle raising them alone. We may never know her full reasoning. But the DNA doesn't lie. Lily and Grace are your daughters." The revelation hit Daniel with the force of an avalanche. The 2 little girls sleeping safely in his penthouse, the children he had grown to love as his own over the past month, were actually his own, his daughters. The family he thought he had lost to tragedy 12 years ago had been living in poverty, moving from foster home to foster home, ultimately abandoned and living alone in a trailer park while he built an empire, never knowing they existed. "I need to see them," he said, standing abruptly, his mind reeling with the implications. "I need to tell them. They have a right to know." But even as he said it, questions flooded his mind like a torrent. How did you tell two 11-year-old girls that the man they thought was their benefactor was actually their father? How did you explain that their mother had lied to everyone about their existence? How did you process the fact that fate had conspired to bring them together in the most miraculous way imaginable? Dr. Martinez stood as well, her expression concerned. "Daniel, this is a tremendous shock for all of you. I strongly recommend family counseling to help navigate this revelation. The girls have been through abandonment and trauma. Learning their entire origin story has been built on a lie could be devastating if not handled properly." As Daniel drove home through the Chicago streets, his mind churned with the magnitude of what he had learned. Victoria had died in a car accident when the girls were 8. He remembered reading about it in the obituaries, feeling a pang of sadness for the woman who had once meant so much to him. But if she had lied about the twins' death, what else had she hidden? How had Lily and Grace ended up in foster care if their mother was alive? Why hadn't she reached out to him when she was struggling? When he walked into his penthouse that evening, he found the girls curled up together on the massive couch, watching a movie and sharing a bowl of popcorn, their homework spread out on the coffee table. They looked up at him with bright smiles, their identical dark eyes. His eyes, he realized now with stunning clarity, sparkling with happiness at his return. They were wearing matching pajamas Mrs. Chen had bought them, their hair still damp from their evening baths, looking like the embodiment of innocent childhood contentment. "Dad's home," Lily called out, the words slipping out naturally before she caught herself and blushed. They had started calling him Dad occasionally, usually when they were relaxed and happy, and it never failed to make his heart swell with joy and pride. In that moment, Daniel Crawford, the man who had built a business empire through calculated decisions and careful planning, realized that some of life's most important moments happened when you weren't planning at all. And as he looked at his daughters, he knew that everything was about to change in ways he could never have imagined, and that the conversation he was about to have would reshape their family forever. Daniel spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with how to tell Lily and Grace the truth. Every conversation felt like walking through a minefield. How do you casually mention to 2 children that you're actually their father? He consulted with Dr. Martinez, called a family therapist, and even spoke with Mrs. Patterson, who had driven up from Cedar Falls to visit the girls and see their new life. "They deserve to know," Eleanor said firmly as they sat in Daniel's study while the girls were at school. "But more than that, they deserve to know gently, with love. These children have been abandoned and disappointed so many times. The way you tell them this will shape how they see family for the rest of their lives." Daniel nodded, understanding the weight of her words. That evening, he asked Lily and Grace to join him in the living room after dinner. They settled on either side of him on the couch, and he could feel his heart hammering against his ribs. "Girls, I need to tell you something important, something that changes everything, but hopefully in a good way." Grace immediately tensed, her hand reaching for Lily's. They had heard those words before, from social workers, from foster parents, usually before their world got turned upside down again. "Are you sending us back?" Lily asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did we do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart, absolutely not," Daniel said quickly, pulling them both closer. "You could never do anything wrong enough for me to send you away. This is about something wonderful, something I just found out." He took a deep breath, knowing that the next words would change all their lives forever. The DNA tests we took for your school records. They showed something incredible. Lily, Grace, I'm your father. Your biological father. The silence that followed was deafening. Both girls stared at him with wide eyes, their identical expressions cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been hope. But our mom said our dad didn't want us, Grace said finally, her scientific mind trying to process this impossible information. Daniel's heart broke at her words. Your mother, our Victoria. She told me you had died at birth. I grieved for you for years, never knowing you were alive, never knowing I had two beautiful daughters growing up without me. His voice cracked with emotion. If I had known you existed, I would have moved heaven and earth to find you. Lily was quiet for a long moment, her 11-year-old mind working through the implications. So when we found you on the road, she said slowly, it wasn't just coincidence, it was like the universe bringing us back together. There was wonder in her voice, and something else, the beginning of understanding that maybe, just maybe, they really did belong somewhere. That's exactly what it was, Daniel said, tears streaming down his face now. You saved my life in more ways than you'll ever know. You brought me home to a family I didn't even know I had lost. He pulled them both into a tight hug, feeling their small bodies shake with emotion. I love you both so much. I've loved you since the moment you pulled me from that car, and now I know why. My heart recognized you even when my mind didn't. Grace pulled back to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Does this mean we get to stay forever? Like really forever? Not just until you get tired of us or find a real family? The question revealed so much about what these children had endured. The constant fear that love was temporary. You are my real family, Daniel said firmly. You're my daughters, and that's forever. Nothing in this world will ever change that. As he said the words, he realized they were the truest thing he had ever spoken. These two little girls had become the center of his universe. And now, knowing they were truly his, made that love feel like destiny. The revelation sparked 1,000 questions from the twins, about their mother, about why she had hidden the truth, about what this meant for their future. Daniel answered what he could, and promised to help them find answers to the rest. As they talked late into the night, none of them noticed the figure standing in the shadows outside Daniel's building, watching his lit windows with calculating eyes. Someone who had been very carefully monitoring Daniel Crawford's life was about to discover that the billionaire CEO had just gained something infinitely more valuable than money and infinitely more vulnerable. 3 weeks after the revelation, life had settled into a new rhythm of happiness for the Crawford family. Daniel had legally adopted the girls, changing their names to Lily and Grace Crawford, and they had started calling him Dad with increasing frequency. The word never failed to make Daniel's heart swell with pride and joy. He had hired additional security for their safety, given their high profile as his daughters, but the measures seemed more precautionary than necessary. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the family therapist Daniel had hired to help them all navigate this transition, was amazed by how naturally the family unit had formed. In all my years of practice, she told Daniel during one of their sessions, I've rarely seen such organic bonding. These girls needed a father figure, and you needed children to love. It's like you were always meant to be together. The girls were thriving in ways that amazed everyone who knew their story. Grace had joined the advanced mathematics team at Lakeshore Academy and was already being courted by programs for gifted children. Lily had discovered a passion for painting and had her artwork displayed in the school's main hallway. Both girls had gained weight, their faces had filled out with proper nutrition, and they laughed more in a day than they had in months at the trailer park. But their happiness was being watched with growing concern by someone from Daniel's past. James Morrison had been Daniel's business partner in the early days of Crawford Industries. Before a bitter falling out had led to a lawsuit that had cost James millions and his reputation. For 12 years, James had been plotting his revenge, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy Daniel Crawford the way Daniel had destroyed him. When James learned about Daniel's newfound daughters through his network of informants, he saw an opportunity too perfect to ignore. Two little girls who meant everything to the man who had ruined his life. It was better than anything he could have planned. James began following their routines, learning their schedules, and developing a plan that would give him the ultimate revenge. The girls leave school every day at 3:15. James told his associate Marcus Webb as they sat in a car across from Lakeshore Academy. Crawford's driver picks them up in the black SUV. They go straight home, except on Thursdays when they stop at the art supply store on Michigan Avenue. James had been watching for 2 weeks, mapping every detail of their lives. Meanwhile, Daniel was completely unaware of the threat gathering around his family. He was too busy marveling at the everyday miracles of fatherhood, helping Grace with her science project, praising Lily's latest painting, reading bedtime stories to children who had never had anyone read to them before. The security he had hired seemed adequate for general precautions, but he had no idea that someone was studying their every move with malicious intent. The first sign of trouble came on a Thursday afternoon. Mrs. Chen, their housekeeper, called Daniel at his office in a panic. "Mr. Crawford, the girls never came home from school." The driver said he waited at pickup, but they never came out. The school says they left with their regular driver at 3:15, but Roberto is here with me. He never picked them up. Daniel's blood turned to ice. In the 6 weeks since the girls had come to live with him, they had never deviated from their routine without telling him. They were responsible children, made cautious by their difficult past. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. As he raced from his office to the school, Daniel had no way of knowing that James Morrison was already putting the second phase of his revenge plan into motion, and that Lily and Grace were about to face the greatest danger of their young lives. The security cameras at Lakeshore Academy would later show the twins walking toward what they believed was their regular car, their faces bright with trust as they climbed into the vehicle. The man behind the wheel wore Roberto's uniform and cap, but his face was turned away from the cameras. By the time Daniel reached the school, his daughters had been missing for 47 minutes, and James Morrison was already making his demands known. The ransom call came to Daniel's private cell phone at exactly 5:30 p.m., just as he was coordinating with the police and FBI agents who had descended on his penthouse. The voice on the other end was mechanically distorted, but the words were crystal clear. "Daniel Crawford, you have something that belongs to me. Now I have something that belongs to you." "Who is this? Where are my daughters?" Daniel's voice was raw with panic and fury. In the 3 hours since Lily and Grace had disappeared, he had aged what felt like years. The FBI had set up equipment to trace calls, and Agent Sarah Kim was frantically signaling for him to keep the caller talking. "You destroyed my life 12 years ago, Crawford. Stole my company, ruined my reputation, left me with nothing. Now you know what it feels like to lose everything that matters." The distorted voice carried an undercurrent of satisfaction that made Daniel's skin crawl. "Your precious little girls are safe, for now. But their continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation." Daniel's mind raced through the enemies he had made in business over the years. Building Crawford Industries hadn't always been clean. He had made hard decisions, crushed competitors, taken calculated risks that had left some people bitter. But who would be twisted enough to target children? "What do you want?" he asked, though he suspected money wouldn't be the answer. "I want you to feel the same helplessness I felt when you destroyed everything I had built," the voice continued. "I want you to watch your empire crumble the way mine did. Tomorrow morning, you will transfer controlling interest of Crawford Industries to the Meridian Corporation. That's 65% of your company's stock. You have until midnight to make the arrangements. Agent Kim was writing furiously on a notepad. Meridian Corp is a shell company. We're tracking the registration now. But Daniel barely registered her words. All he could think about was Lily and Grace, probably scared and confused, wondering why their new father hadn't come to save them yet. "And if I refuse?" Daniel asked, though he already knew he would give up everything he owned for his daughter's safety. "Then you'll never see your daughters again. And Crawford, if you involve the police or FBI." There was a pause, and Daniel's heart stopped. "Well, let's just say accidents happen to little girls all the time." The line went dead. Agent Kim immediately began coordinating with her tech team to trace the call, but Daniel was already moving toward his office. "Where are you going?" she called after him. "To arrange the transfer," Daniel replied without hesitation. "I don't care about the company. I only care about getting my girls back." Agent Kim tried to explain about negotiation tactics and the dangers of giving in to ransom demands, but Daniel wasn't listening. He had found his family in the most miraculous way possible. He wasn't going to lose them now. What Daniel didn't know was that at that very moment, Lily and Grace were being held in an abandoned warehouse 30 miles outside Chicago. They were scared, but unharmed, and more importantly, they were already working on an escape plan. The years of taking care of themselves had taught them to think creatively under pressure. Grace had noticed that their captor had made several mistakes, leaving their hands tied with rope instead of zip ties, underestimating their intelligence, and most critically, not realizing that identical twins could communicate in ways that didn't require words. As Daniel prepared to sacrifice his life's work for his daughters, Lily and Grace were proving that the courage and determination that had saved him on that stormy night was still burning bright in their hearts. The next 24 hours would test every member of the Crawford family in ways they never could have imagined, but it would also prove that some bonds are strong enough to survive anything. While Daniel worked through the night to liquidate his assets and transfer ownership of Crawford Industries, Lily and Grace were putting their own plan into action. The abandoned warehouse where they were being held was cold and damp, but the twins had survived worse conditions. More importantly, they had each other, and 11 years of relying only on themselves had made them resourceful in ways their captors couldn't have anticipated. James Morrison had made a critical error in his planning. He had assumed that because the girls were wealthy now, they had become soft and helpless. He had no idea that these children had spent years fending for themselves, that they knew how to pick locks with hairpins, a skill learned when they were accidentally locked out of foster homes, and that they could move silently through darkness, a necessity when sneaking out to find food. "The guard changes every 4 hours," Grace whispered to Lily as they sat back to back, working to untie each other's ropes. "I've been counting. The next change is at 2 a.m. That's in 43 minutes. Lee." Her mathematical mind had been tracking patterns since their capture, noting the subtle differences in the guards' routines, the sounds from outside that indicated their location, and the weak points in their confinement. Lily had been studying their physical surroundings with an artist's eye for detail. "There's a skylight about 12 feet up on the north wall," she murmured back. "If we can stack those crates near the wall, we can reach it. And I saw a fire escape on the outside when they brought us in." The rope around her wrists was beginning to loosen under Grace's persistent work. What neither girl said aloud, but both understood, was that they weren't just escaping for themselves. They were escaping for their father, the man who had already given them more love and security than they had ever known, who was probably destroying everything he had built trying to save them. They had found their family, and they weren't going to let anyone take that away. At exactly 2 a.m., As the tired guard was replaced by an equally tired accomplice, the twins put their plan into motion. Moving with the silent precision they had perfected during their homeless months, they stacked wooden crates to reach the skylight. Grace, smaller and lighter, climbed up first and managed to force open the old window. Lily followed. And within minutes, both girls were on the warehouse roof, breathing the cold night air of freedom. They found themselves in an industrial district about 30 miles from downtown Chicago, but they recognized the area from a field trip their class had taken to a science museum nearby. More importantly, they could see the distant glow of the city lights and knew which direction to go. Without discussion, they began running toward home, toward their father, toward the family that was worth fighting for. Meanwhile, James Morrison was savoring what he believed was his moment of triumph. Daniel Crawford had agreed to all his demands and was scheduled to sign the transfer papers at 9 a.m. But when Morrison's men went to check on the girls at dawn, they found only empty ropes and an open skylight. The children he had thought were helpless had outsmarted his entire operation. By the time Morrison realized the twins had escaped, Lily and Grace were already in a taxi heading home, having convinced a sympathetic driver to let them call their father collect. They had walked 12 miles through the night, their expensive school clothes torn and dirty, but their spirits unbroken. As their taxi pulled up to Daniel's building, they could see FBI vehicles and knew their father was probably sick with worry. The reunion in Daniel's penthouse was everything you would expect. Tears, desperate hugs, and relief so profound it was almost painful. But more than that, it was proof that the bond between this father and his daughters was stronger than any criminal could break. As Daniel held his girls close, listening to their incredible story of escape and survival, he realized that they had saved him once again. Not just his life this time, but everything that made life worth living. The aftermath of the kidnapping attempt brought unexpected consequences for the Crawford family. James Morrison was arrested within hours of the girls' escape, but the experience had fundamentally changed how Daniel viewed their safety and future. The realization that his wealth could put his daughters in danger forced him to make some difficult decisions about the life he had built. "I've been thinking," Daniel said to Lily and Grace, as they sat together on the couch 3 days after their ordeal, still reluctant to let them out of his sight for more than a few minutes. "Maybe we should consider moving somewhere quieter, somewhere we can be a normal family, without all the attention and risks that come with Crawford Industries." The girls exchanged one of their silent conversations before Grace spoke up. "Dad, you worked your whole life to build your company. We don't want you to give that up because of us." At 12 years old, she somehow understood the magnitude of what he was considering, and it troubled her deeply. Lily nodded in agreement. "We've lived through scary things before. We're not going to let some bad man make us run away from the life we love." Her artistic mind had been processing the trauma through drawings, sketches of the warehouse, the escape route, but also beautiful portraits of their family together, stronger than before. Daniel marveled at their resilience. These children had been through more in their short lives than most adults ever would, yet they faced each challenge with courage and wisdom that humbled him. "You're both incredibly brave," he said, pulling them close. "But it's my job, as your father, to keep you safe." Dr. Rodriguez, their family therapist, had been working with all three of them to process the kidnapping trauma. "What strikes me most," she told Daniel during a private session, "is how this experience has actually strengthened your family bond rather than weakening it. The girls don't see themselves as victims. They see themselves as survivors who protected their family." The legal proceedings against James Morrison revealed the depth of his obsession with revenge. For 12 years he'd been planning Daniel's destruction, accumulating evidence of every business decision, every competitor Crawford Industries had absorbed, every deal that had gone in Daniel's favor. But his hatred had blinded him to the reality that Daniel had simply been better at business, not malicious or underhanded. The man was consumed by bitterness, FBI agent Kim explained to Daniel as they reviewed the case files. He blamed you for his failures instead of learning from them, in a twisted way. Your daughter's escape not only saved them, but probably saved you from making a decision you would have regretted forever, giving up everything you built to a man who never deserved it. The media attention from the case was intense, but surprisingly positive. The story of two brave little girls who escaped their kidnappers and the father who was willing to sacrifice his empire to save them captured public imagination. Crawford Industries' stock actually rose as investors were impressed by Daniel's values and priorities, but more importantly, the experience had taught the family what really mattered. "You know what's funny?" Lily said one evening as they prepared dinner together, a new family tradition Daniel had started. "When we were in that warehouse, I wasn't scared we wouldn't see you again. I knew you'd find us somehow, or we'd find our way back to you, because that's what families do." Grace nodded seriously. "And now we know that even if everything else went away, the money, the big house, the company, we'd still have each other. That's worth more than anything else in the world." Her words carried the wisdom of a child who had learned early that material possessions meant nothing without people to love. As Daniel looked at his daughters, brilliant, brave, beautiful children who had found their way back to him against all odds, he realized that James Morrison had failed in more ways than he could ever know. Instead of destroying Daniel's life, the kidnapping had shown him that his life was more complete and meaningful than he had ever imagined possible. The man who had thought he had everything had discovered that he'd had nothing at all, until two little girls pulled him from a wrecked car and showed him what love really meant. 6 months later, the Crawford family had found their new normal, and it was more beautiful than any of them could have imagined. Daniel had restructured Crawford Industries to allow him more time with his daughters, bringing in trusted partners to handle day-to-day operations, while he focused on the strategic vision that had built the company. But more importantly, he had learned to balance success with the joy of being a father. The penthouse had been transformed from a bachelor's showcase into a real family home. Lily's artwork covered the walls, Grace's science projects occupied an entire room, and the sterile perfection had been replaced with the comfortable chaos of a house where children lived and laughed and grew. Mrs. Chen had become more than a housekeeper. She was family, the grandmother the girls had never had. "Dad, look at this," Grace called from her bedroom, where she was working on a genetics project for her advanced biology class. At 12, she was already taking high school-level courses and talking about becoming a doctor. "I mapped out our family tree, including Mum's side. Did you know we have cousins in California?" Daniel came to look at her carefully constructed chart, marveling at her scientific precision. Through the private investigator he had hired, they had learned more about Victoria and her family, connecting the girls to relatives they never knew existed. The truth about why Victoria had hidden their existence remained partially mysterious. But letters found among her belongings suggested she had been protecting Daniel from the responsibility of children when his company was struggling, never imagining he would become so successful. "She loved you, you know," Daniel had told the girls when they learned about their mother's letters. "She made a choice she thought was best for everyone, even though it was wrong. But maybe everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to. Maybe we needed this journey to become the family we were meant to be." Lily looked up from her easel where she was working on a painting of their first day together, Daniel in his hospital bed, surrounded by two small girls who didn't know they were saving their father. "I think she's watching us now," Lily said softly. "I think she knows we're happy and safe, and that you love us the way she always hoped someone would." The annual Crawford Industries Charity Gala was approaching, and for the first time, Daniel was bringing his daughters as his official family. The business world that had once been his entire existence now served a greater purpose, providing resources to help other children who needed families, supporting foster care reform, and funding education programs for disadvantaged youth. "Are you nervous about the gala, Doctor?" Rodriguez asked during one of their regular family sessions. The therapy had become less about trauma recovery and more about maintaining healthy family dynamics as they continued to grow together. "Not nervous," Grace said thoughtfully. "Excited. We want people to know that adoption can work, that families can be built in different ways." Her practical mind had already been planning how to use their story to help other children in similar situations. Lily nodded in agreement. "And we want Dad to be proud of us. He saved us from being alone forever, so we want to help him save other kids too." Her artistic vision had expanded to include creating awareness campaigns for children's charities, using her talents to give voice to children who needed advocates. As the family prepared for their public debut as the Crawfords, Daniel reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them together. A year ago, he had been a successful but lonely man, driven by ambition but empty of purpose. Now he was a father to two extraordinary children who had taught him that the greatest success in life wasn't measured in dollars or deals, but in the love shared between family members. The night of the gala, as Daniel walked into the ballroom with Lily on one arm and Grace on the other, he saw their story reflected in the faces of the crowd. Hope, wonder, and the belief that sometimes the most impossible dreams do come true. The girls, elegant in their formal dresses, but still unmistakably themselves, charmed everyone they met with their intelligence, warmth, and obvious love for their father. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel said when he took the stage to address the crowd, "a year ago, I thought I had everything. Tonight, I know I have everything, because I have them." He gestured to Lily and Grace, who were watching from the front table with bright smiles. "My daughters taught me that the greatest treasures in life aren't found in boardrooms or bank accounts. They're found in the hearts of the people we love." As the crowd erupted in applause, Lily and Grace exchanged one of their wordless conversations and smiled. They had started this journey as two abandoned little girls with nothing but each other. Now they were part of something bigger, a family built on love, strengthened by adversity, and destined to help other children find their own happy endings. The story that began with a stormy night and a crashed car had become something none of them could have imagined, a testament to the power of fate, the strength of family, and the truth that sometimes the people who save us are the ones who need saving most of all. And as Daniel Crawford looked at his daughters, he knew that every challenge they had faced, every moment of pain and uncertainty, had been worth it to arrive at this perfect moment of love, belonging, and hope for the future.